If there's one thing that Mercedes struggles a lot with in the 2023 season, it's the DRS straight-line speed deficit. This is an area where they've been brutally beaten by teams like Red Bull, and in the first two tracks, Aston Martin and Ferrari as well. Parallel from the new design that is being cooked and baked for Imola, Mercedes is finding solutions for the next track as well, given the fact that Baku has one of the longest straight-line deltas that could utilise the DRS speed more than any other track on the calendar. Join us as we go through the latest developments in Mercedes and at the speed of the W14 that is expected to be brought in Baku thanks to the DRS upgrades. Mercedes has produced a car for 2023 that struggles with the generation of downforce, mostly because they've been battling the rear end issues that the W13 has been giving them in the previous season. As an aftermath, the team built a car that has a very strong front end, meaning that it's too pointy and the lack of rear downforce is more than present. On the other hand, the team that gave the biggest and most pleasant surprise to the F1 world, if you're not a Mercedes or Ferrari fan, is Aston Martin, as the AMR23 is using pretty much all of the parts of Mercedes and is the closest car to the RB19 in the corners, with a gap of only 1.5 kilometers an hour. But what is coming next for Mercedes? The W14 has substantially improved the average straight-line speed over the W13, and now the difference to the RB19 is very small, 2.6 kilometers an hour behind Red Bull. The gap to the AMR23 is non-existent, to say the least, with this number being around 0.2 kilometers an hour. So rest assured that the new upgrades that Mercedes are bringing to Baku will definitely improve the straight-line speed and it will make the battlefield closer between the top two teams. One of the things that Mercedes is going to utilise the most is the use of the rear axle, or the gearbox rear suspension power unit, which is produced in Brackley. Given the fact that Aston Martin is producing the speeds with the same parts from Mercedes, and will most likely see Mercedes looking up to Aston Martin the most as time passes by. This may not be the long-term plan for progress, but rest assured it's going to benefit the team, and it may be something that we witness as early as in Baku. Another thing is that the W14 is going to receive a boost in its power, and now reports say that the engine is finally matching the power produced by Honda and Ferrari. This was something unthinkable the previous season, and while Mercedes had the most reliable engine on the grid, with them barely missing any race due to a huge blow of the W14, it's definitely not the same scenario in 2023, but with greater power comes greater responsibility. Mercedes racking up the power on the W14 meant that the reliability issues were doomed to happen, and this is something Ted Kravitz has tried to warn us about before the start of the season. We saw Russell's engine catch fire in Melbourne, and it's quite possible Mercedes is now trying to find that fine line between great speed and reliability, which is a very easy thing to mess up if you go a bit more on the powerful side of things. And now, with the small advantages that Red Bull and Aston Martin have, it's all to play for Mercedes in terms of improving the aerodynamic prospects of your car. After all, Imola is something that could prove to be the track that Mercedes was desperately waiting for, and even though the small upgrades that the team may bring to Baku do have the opportunity to shut down the gap between them and Red Bull as well as Aston Martin, this is unlikely to be the race that the Brackley-based squad is happily looking forward to. The team is now heavily working towards fixing the reliability issues of the W14, because if they want to be competitive, they need to find that perfect spot, and this is something that Mercedes is definitely capable of. Now, whether the team will be able to bring those aerodynamic gains sooner rather than later, more precisely at Imola, time will tell. But one thing is for sure, a new era for the W14 is coming, and we're down for it. But how does the team plan to reduce the DRS advantage of Red Bull in terms of staff and experts to address the problem? The return of James Allison speaks the most to this concern, and it was more than evident that if Mercedes wanted to experience some glory and be back on winning paths, they'd need someone who worked with them a couple of years ago when they were at the peak of the sport. While Allison's role was clarified by Wolff, and it was said that he wasn't that much involved in an active role in upgrading the W14, it's been rumoured that his imprint are all over the upgrades that Mercedes is bringing to Imola, meaning that the team can use his services in these tough times. When talking about this matter, Wolff said, "He's involved in the long-term strategy of the team, but he's doing more activities like America's Cup. He's somebody that's still very important for the organisation." As the drivers agreed that the aerodynamics of the car definitely need a bit of improvement, Mercedes has started a new path, one from which they are seeking to reduce the dominance of Red Bull and potentially prevail in the battle with Aston Martin. While Wolff tried to remain realistic about the goals of the team, there's still one team that's very much ahead of Mercedes right now, and that is Red Bull. But the narrative in the team has shifted massively on the positive side, which gives us all the right reasons to be happy. Nonetheless, there may be one problem that Mercedes would want to tackle down as soon as possible, one that started to appear in 2022 at the end of the season and is still present now here in 2023, and that's the clipping. Clipping is a process in which a deficiency of the ERS happens, and Mercedes has been dealing with this issue for quite some time, but they do remain relatively quiet as to how and why they deal with it in the first place. Despite the clipping process being present, Mercedes' ICE unit is delivering the power that the team is requesting it to deliver, meaning that while it's an annoying phenomenon, it isn't something that's currently interfering with their long-term plans for the engine upgrades. According to analysis, Mercedes W14 has experienced this clipping phenomenon not just in the race in Melbourne, but in Q3, in which the car loses speed despite having a full throttle on it as the battery gets drained. Clipping is usually correlated with higher drag, lower ICE power and a worse ERS system. And thanks to the clipping itself, Verstappen was able to gain more time compared to the W14. This is very important because the RB19, although very dominant, isn't very good on front-ended tracks, as we've seen. The difference with the W14 in terms of qualifying pace wasn't that high. But at this point, we're very happy to see Mercedes where they actually belong, in the fight for podiums and potentially winning. Now that they have a bit more extra time to spend in the wind tunnels, we can't wait to see what the future has in store for the Brackley-based squad. And according to Russell, the car definitely has the performance that it needs to have. It's just a bit wild and needs to be tamed down. Comments that were made by Hamilton last year as well. When talking about the W14 in general, the younger Briton added, "It's comparable to riding a horse. A Mercedes is a faster horse than Williams, but it's not just about speed. Riding a horse from A to B and it doesn't zig is like sitting in a Formula 1 car that suits your driving style. One merges into another. At the moment, however, we have a lame horse. We know that it has a lot of performance in it, but it's not happy that someone wants to ride it, and the way of riding style doesn't suit him either." Furthermore, Hamilton went on to complain that, apart from the lack of rear downforce generation, the W14 feels like you're sitting on the front wheels thanks to the cockpit being way too narrow. All of this makes a perfect case about Mercedes having to work overnight, late hours, in order to bring back what's theirs: race wins and potentially championships. However, with such a dominant Red Bull and such a prominent Aston Martin, this mission is going to be much harder than we could possibly imagine. What do you think about Mercedes' upgrades for tackling down Red Bull's DRS dominance? Do you think that the W14 has the potential to tackle down the RB19 and maybe be involved in the championship fight in 2023? Let us know in the comments below.